Hi, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. Happy Valentine's Day and happy first day of early voting. Tonight in the preliminary open meeting, we had a transportation study update. So the North Texas Council of Governments came and gave a presentation at the Regional Transportation Commission and talked about expanding basically public transit across the broader North Texas area. Right now it's kind of piecemeal. I'll skip to the punchline, and this was discussed later on in the presentation. Basically, it's going to require most cities joining onto DART. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon, and it's going to take them joining en masse, not just piecemeal. So it's definitely not going to happen anytime soon, and it's definitely not going to happen without some DART reforms. So when the DART resolution was formed at the state legislature level, this was in 1983, I believe. The deal was Dallas area rapid transit. Dallas was the 800-pound gorilla, and all the other gorillas were like 20 or 30 pounds. So it was pretty much Dallas. And then there was Fort Worth, but regarding bordering cities, it was pretty much Dallas. Now, to sign on to DART, which Plano did in, I believe, 1986 or thereabouts, maybe 87, you had to agree to provide half of all your sales tax revenue, at least the city's sales tax revenue. So in Texas, the state takes 6.25% sales tax, and then municipalities can charge up to an additional 2%. So if you wanted to be to sign on to DART, out of that 2% sales tax, half of it had to go to DART. Well, back in 1986, Plano was not the economic center that it is today, and we didn't have nearly that sales tax revenue, so it seemed like a pretty good deal at the time. However, fast forward a few decades, the makeup of Plano is very different now, and we have a very large sales tax base in our own right, yet half of that sales tax is still going to DART. So let's say, fast forward now to 2022, we want to leave DART, or we want to negotiate our terms. Well, we can't, because the terms are set under state statute. That would have to be changed in Austin. And if we just want to get out of DART entirely, we have one window every 6 years where our people can take a vote on it. We can actually put it up for a vote every 6 years. But it's a vote of all in or all out. Now, never mind the bus networks and GoLink, we have the light rail, so it's not feasible to say we're just going to get out and we're just going to get all out. But here's the rub. If we do have that vote, and if our people do decide, you know what, we're done with DART, we want out of the DART system, then the city still has to keep paying our share of DART's debt until we have paid off our share at the moment that we voted to leave DART. Now, our share, I keep using in air quotes, is based not on what we have benefited from DART or the infrastructure that has been used in the city of Plano or anything like that. It's based on our population, whether or not that population uses DART or how much of DART it can benefit from. And right now, we would have to keep paying half of our sales tax revenue. Last I checked, which was more than a year ago, I think it was almost 8 years. We just have to keep paying half of our sales tax revenue, but not have DART in the city. So that's an enormous exit cost. And so that's one of the barriers that some of the other cities that might otherwise think of joining DART have to look forward to. Like it's like the mafia, once in, never out. So those are some of the hindrances, and they know that, and so the idea that they're going to just join DART is a hard sell. So moving on from that, in the regular meeting, we had a special moment. Pat and Angela Miner are both former council members, husband and wife, and they were actually amongst the first people that I met when my wife and I moved to Plano in 2003. We lived in the same neighborhood, and Pat came knocking on my door about a zoning case because I was within the 200 feet of a proposed development. And so that got me involved in the neighborhood, and that got me involved to a lesser degree at the time with the city. And Pat later ran for council. We served together on the HOA at my old neighborhood in East Plano. And I also served with Angela on the HOA before I moved to West Plano now. And so Pat and Angela are moving to Greece. So we honored them tonight for their service and gave them matching his and hers keys to the city on Valentine's Day. So Pat and Angela, wish you the very best in Greece, and thank you for all the service you've given to the city of Plano and to me personally. We moved on to, pulled an item from the consent agenda. We offer tax exemptions for heritage properties. So basically we want to maintain a heritage district that recognizes the history of Plano. And for homes that, or properties I should say, not just homes that qualify, we offer a tax exemption. This is ranging from 1/3 to 100% of property tax exemption, and it applies across all jurisdictions, city, county, Collin College, and Plano ISD. So for properties that qualify, they can get up to 100% tax exemption. So I pulled this for individual consideration because I just wanted to talk about it. I'd like staff, and I asked staff to come to us later with a report discussing our methodology, best practices in terms of heritage sites and heritage communities, and offsetting the cost of maintenance, since the city wants to preserve a heritage community, offsetting the cost of maintenance for heritage properties which are very old and have some particular maintenance needs, not just that they require more maintenance than the average property, but in some cases they require specialized maintenance. You can't just have a handyman come with a bunch of supplies from Home Depot and fix her up. So what I'd like to do is try to strike the balance between offsetting those increased costs that we as a community see value to, without just giving a windfall to people by not having to pay property taxes if they're not going to happen to have to invest in such maintenance, or at least not to that degree. So that passed, but we're going to have that staff report, and we're going to have a future discussion about our methodology. Then came the big ticket items. There were only two tonight. One was tabled. It was along the same vein, but we discussed a 9% housing tax credit for two proposed affordable housing developments. Now, I'm using the air quotes there again because, as any regular viewers of this recap know, two things get conflated when we use the term affordable housing. One is housing that is affordable, and the other is taxpayer subsidized housing, or government subsidized housing, which is still taxpayer subsidized housing. So there is no question that property values and the cost of housing has grown tremendously here in the past decade or so. But when we discuss these affordable housing projects and developments, they were literally applying for a tax credit. The way this works is if the council provided their resolution of support for them to apply, they apply to the state, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, for a TDHCA for short, for a tax credit from the state, which basically subsidizes rent for people who are below a certain threshold of the area median income. So the area median income is around $80,000. It's not just Plano. The area isn't defined strictly as Plano. It's broader, but if people are at 80% of the area median income, or 60%, then they would get a certain number of units in the apartment complex are set aside for people who meet those income requirements. And so the development would get that subsidy and use that to subsidize lower rent, not market rate rent, for a portion of the units in that development. And then a smaller portion would be sold at market rate. So that's the way this works. So the vote tonight was to provide the resolution of support for them to apply to the state for that housing tax credit. We were not voting on the development themselves. However, we do have a criteria. We revisited this a year or two ago. Criteria through which our Community Relations Commission reviews these to determine if the proposed project meets these criteria. And if they score a certain amount, then they are eligible for a recommendation or of support, a letter of support, basically, from the city council so they can apply to the state, and that factors into the state scoring criteria, etc. I've been wrestling with a couple of things. First, the concept of affordable housing, taxpayer subsidized housing, because while the cost of housing is going up, it's going up for everybody. And so the idea behind taxpayer subsidized housing is so that we can provide new housing within the city borders at a reduced rate for somebody. We're actually taking the tax money from somebody else who is meeting increased housing costs of their own, and then giving it to that lower income, presumably lower income person, maybe not even lower income, so that they can have a nicer place than they otherwise would have been able to afford. So I have an inherent challenge with this Robin Hood kind of program. Second, there are some cases where we have multiple votes concerning the same development, and we're given to understand that each one, like tonight, we are only considering whether to give a resolution of support so they can apply to the housing tax credit. Then they're going to come back later for the rezoning and the development and anything else that follows. And those are going to be parsed out amongst separate votes, but they still are all part and parcel to the same development. And even though we're supposed to decouple all of those votes and take them individually, I have a really hard time intellectually actually decoupling them, because they still are part and parcel to the same development, and I have to consider them holistically. But we did approve as a council these scoring criteria to say, if you met these criteria, then you are eligible for a resolution of support. So I ended up abstaining, my only abstention ever tonight, on both applications for the housing tax credit resolution of support. I've never abstained before. I've always voted yes or no. And so I figured out what that little yellow button did on the dais. And I abstained from both because I did not want to lend my support to a concept that I might not truly be behind. But at the same time, I didn't want to vote no against it and deny it for something that we had said, if you meet these criteria, then you are eligible for this resolution of support. So I ended up abstaining. I was the only abstention. The rest voted and passed 7-0 with my abstention. And so they will be able to apply, and they will apply to the TDHCA at the state level for that housing tax credit. And then they will presumably come back in the future for approval for the zoning, if necessary. I presume it's necessary, and hence the development. So this is something that is going to be evaluated a lot more because it's coming up more, and hey, I'm pressing it more. So stay tuned for that. And these are some very weighty issues, but I encourage everybody to get involved and bone up on this and come to a city council meeting and speak your mind. Thank you very much for tuning in. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Shelby Williams. God bless.